The first wrong thing was the angle of the clipboard. I stood under the awning of the local coffee shop, the rain coming down in a gray, relentless sheet, and watched the woman who was legally my wife get backed against a wet brick wall. The woman holding the clipboard, Eleanor, the neighborhood HOA president, kept jabbing the bottom corner of the plastic board toward Macie's collarbone. It wasn't a physical strike, but it was an invasion of space designed to make Macie shrink. Macie didn't shrink, but her shoulders were rigid beneath her thin blue floral dress. Rain had darkened the blue floral cotton at the shoulders and hem. Beside her feet, a metal thermos had been knocked over in the shuffle, the lid unscrewed. The sharp, bitter smell of cold coffee left out overnight rose from the wet pavement, cutting through the scent of rain and exhaust. The fire inspector has already been notified. Macie. Eleanor's voice carried over the traffic, thin and nasal. You can't house an elderly man on the third floor of a commercial space with a non-compliant egress. The board is issuing the daily penalties starting tomorrow. I stepped off the curb. My navy raincoat absorbed the drizzle, the heavy cotton offering a familiar weight. I had a 6-month memory gap from a concussive blast on a VIP security detail in Jakarta. I didn't remember the day I stood in a courthouse and signed the paperwork to marry Macie Davis. I didn't remember the strategic conversations we'd apparently had about pooling my corporate security assets with her heritage trust to save this building. But my procedural memory was perfectly intact. I recognized a threat, and I knew how to dismantle it. Step back. I kept my voice low, pitched just under the sound of the rain, but I didn't slow my stride. Eleanor startled, the clipboard dropping an inch. She turned, her expression pinching into a defensive scowl. I stopped between them. I didn't look at Eleanor yet. I looked at Macie. Her dark hair was pinned up, stray wet strands sticking to her neck. She was shivering, though her jaw was set like iron. She held a large black umbrella, collapsed, her knuckles white around the curved wooden handle. She hadn't even opened it, too distracted by the ambush. "Are you all right?" I asked Macie. "I'm fine, Corbin," she said, though her voice had a slight tremor. "Excuse me," Eleanor interrupted, her confidence returning. "We are in the middle of official board business. The penalties require written notice and a cure period," I said, finally turning my head to look at the HOA president. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't posture. I stated only what I could document. You are attempting to serve an accelerated demand on a public sidewalk while blocking her path. Send the notice through council. Any further contact needs a witness. The fire code will be assessed by the city and by licensed professionals. I cut in. I am the registered co-owner and the security consultant coordinating the response. Send correspondence to our legal counsel. If you approach my wife this way again, I will document it as intimidation and seek an appropriate order. Eleanor opened her mouth, closed it, and took a deliberate step back. She pulled her coat tighter around her neck. The inspector comes in 3 weeks. We'll see how your professionals handle a condemned building. She turned on her heel and marched away, her boots splashing loudly in the puddles. The silence she left behind was heavy, filled only by the drumming rain. I looked down at the spilled thermos. The cold coffee smell was sharp, stale. It grounded me, pulling me out of the adrenaline spike and back into the strange reality of my life. I bent down, picked up the metal cylinder, and screwed the cap back on before handing it to Macie. "Thank you," she said softly, taking it. Her fingers were freezing. "You're shivering," I noted. She looked down at her dress. I was setting up the kiln in the studio. "It's 80 degrees in there. I just ran out to grab Uncle Arthur his morning tea." And Eleanor was waiting. She shifted her grip on the black umbrella she was still holding. She held it out toward me. It was a practical gesture, offering me the tool to keep us dry since she was already soaked. "We need to get inside," I said, taking the handle from her. Macie's gaze sharpened. "Don't issue commands in my building." The words landed cleanly. My hand stopped on the umbrella release. I had spent years moving people through danger with short sentences because hesitation could get someone hurt. Here, on her sidewalk, the reflex had turned her into another variable to control. I stepped back half a pace. Would you come inside with me while we review what Eleanor served? Her jaw loosened. Yes? The wood of the handle was warm from her grip. The black canopy snapped open with a satisfying thud. I held it over us without steering her by the arm. You don't win an argument, I said, my voice quiet as we stood in the small dry space beneath the nylon. You remove the reason for it. She looked up at me. Her eyes were a complex hazel, tired but sharp. She was 34, 5 years older than me, and carried a kind of grounded responsibility I respected on a cellular level, even if I couldn't remember the emotional weight of how we got here. Removing the reason means retrofitting a 100-year-old stairwell, she pointed out, by the 10th of next month. Then we build a lawful plan and retrofit it. I angled the umbrella against the wind. Let's go check on Arthur. We walked the half-block to the studio in a shared, synchronized rhythm. We had to move close to stay under the umbrella. It wasn't romantic. It was geometry. I began to tell her that the quiet beneath the canopy felt familiar. Then the sentence caught somewhere behind my teeth. Instead, I checked the front door latch twice and logged the warped strike plate in my phone. The building was a 3-story brick structure. The ground floor was Macie's art therapy studio, a sprawling space smelling of wet clay and turpentine. The second floor was our apartment, a space we technically shared, though I kept to the spare room. The third floor was a converted loft where her Uncle Arthur lived. Arthur had early-stage dementia and a bad hip. Moving him wasn't just inconvenient. A sudden transfer to emergency respite care could strip away the routine that kept him oriented. That was why we had engineered this marriage. Macie needed capital and a co-signer to buy out the other heirs and secure the building. I had needed a stable stateside residence and a trusted proxy for my security firm's assets while I recovered. A modern, pragmatic contract, signed before the blast erased the emotional context of it. We climbed the 2 flights of stairs. The wood creaked under my boots. The stairwell was wide, but the banisters were antique, and there were no secondary fire doors. I photographed the deficiencies, marked each landing on a floor plan Macie pulled from a cabinet, and noted where the public studio traffic overlapped with Arthur's residential route. Eleanor wasn't wrong about the code. She was weaponizing a real vulnerability. Macie unlocked the 3rd-floor door. Arthur was sitting in his worn leather armchair by the window, watching the rain, an old radio playing jazz at a low volume. "Macie," Arthur said, his face brightening. He looked at me, his brow furrowing slightly. "Corbin, you're standing very straight today. Working." "Always working, Arthur," I said, offering a faint, tight smile. "I got your tea," Macie said, setting a paper cup on the small table beside him. She moved around the room with practiced efficiency, adjusting his blanket, checking the pill organizer on the counter. It was a caregiving duty she performed twice a day, every day. It was the anchor of her routine. I stood by the door, assessing the room. The egress point was a single heavy oak door. The fire escape window was painted shut. The sprinkler heads were old enough that no one should have trusted them without testing. "Corbin?" Macie called softly. She was standing by the kitchenette. "Do you want coffee?" "Real coffee, not the stuff in the thermos." "Black," I said automatically. 2 sugars. Macie paused, a small, sad smile touching the corner of her mouth. "You don't take sugar, Corbin. You take it black with a pinch of salt." I froze. A precise wrong guess. My brain had served up a default preference from years ago, before the blast, before whatever routine we had established in the missing months. It cost me a beat of silence. The reminder of the void in my head was a cold draft in the warm room. "Right," I said evenly, masking the frustration. "Salt." She poured the coffee, tapped a dash of salt into the mug, and handed it to me. "It's okay," she said, her voice dropping so Arthur wouldn't hear. "You're doing fine." I took the mug. "I need every existing plan, permit, inspection report, and contractor invoice. I also need a licensed fire protection engineer and a preservation architect who can tell us what the building can actually support. I can coordinate the risk plan and evidence. I can't certify the structure." Macie crossed her arms. Can we afford all of that? The HOA penalties are going to drain the operating account if we don't cure the notice. I have contingency funds, I said, taking a sip of the coffee. It was exactly right. The money isn't the problem. The timeline is. I called Lena Ortiz before I finished the mug. Lena was a licensed fire protection engineer who had reviewed evacuation plans for 2 museum clients my firm protected. She did not owe me a favor, which was why I trusted the price she quoted and the limits she stated. I can inspect tomorrow at 7, she said over speakerphone. I will not sign anything I can't verify. If the wall assembly is hidden, someone opens it under permit. If the sprinklers are obsolete, they get tested by a certified contractor. Macie leaned over the table. 7 is when I help Arthur shower and set out his medication. I opened my calendar without commenting. 8:30. Lena paused. 8:30 works. Macie glanced at me. I had already shifted the contractor walkthrough and moved the vendor call to 7:45. She did not thank me. She simply uncrossed her arms and slid the permit folder across the table. That was enough. The next morning, Lena arrived with a thermal imaging camera, a tablet, and the indifference of someone interested only in what could fail. Macie arranged the city records by date while I built a timeline, and a certified suppression contractor tested the basement line. 2 third-floor sprinkler heads failed. Macie's hand flattened against the table. So Eleanor was right. About the deficiency, Lena said, not about the cure. We can isolate the riser and design temporary suppression while the permanent line is replaced. I assigned access windows, vendor escorts, and a route that kept Arthur away from the work. Macie moved the children's clay class to the back room. By noon, Lena had issued a preliminary hazard memorandum, and we had a risk matrix, an occupancy map, and 3 vendor confirmations. That afternoon, the children's watercolor class gathered behind a plastic dust barrier. Theo, a boy holding a brush in one fist and hearing protection in the other, stared at the taped hallway. Are we getting kicked out? He asked. The studio's open today, Macie said, crouching beside him. We moved the tables, and Mr. Parker made a safe route. Theo looked at me. Are you a firefighter? No, I make sure firefighters can reach the right door. Like a map boss? Temporary title. The adults laughed, and the class began 10 minutes late instead of disappearing. If the building closed, it was not only an account balance, it was Theo's chair, Arthur's radio upstairs, and Macie holding their routines together. For the next 2 days, the building became a tactical zone. The threat of the inspector's deadline forced us into a grueling rhythm, but the rhythm had names and handoffs instead of panic. During the day, I coordinated structural access, escorted vendors through occupied areas, logged every photograph, and updated the emergency risk protocol after each finding. Macie managed the studio, the permits, and Arthur's routine. Lena reviewed the exposed assemblies and refused to let speed turn into fiction. Late on the 4th evening, the contractors left, leaving the east wall of the stairwell exposed down to the studs. I was standing on the landing, running a laser measure across the temporary access boundary to confirm the fire door clearance recorded on the architect's drawing. My muscles ached from moving barriers and equipment cases. I wiped dust from my forehead with the back of my hand. Macie came up the stairs. She was wearing faded jeans and an oversized gray sweater. She held a clipboard of her own, the contractor invoices. They're charging a 20% premium for the rush, she said, leaning against the solid section of the wall. I approved it. I said, logging the measurement into my phone. It's cheaper than the HOA fines, and Lena confirmed the frame specification before I released the order. She sighed, rubbing the bridge of her nose. The overhead work light cast deep shadows under her eyes. She looked exhausted. Did you eat yet? I asked. It was a practical question, devoid of romantic inflection. Macie blinked, looking up at me. I had a protein bar around noon. It's 9 o'clock. I clipped the laser measure to my belt. That's not eating. I've been dealing with the permits. She deflected, though she swayed slightly as she shifted her weight. I walked down the 2 steps to where she stood, then stopped outside her reach. You're managing Arthur, the studio, and the paperwork. If you collapse, the plan loses its center. I ordered food from the Thai place on the corner. It's on the kitchen island. She looked at me, a complex expression crossing her face. You ordered pad thai? I ordered the green curry, I said, because I handled my friend's death last year by replying to everything with a thumbs-up emoji, like a coward, and I still can't remember my own coffee order. But I read the receipt history and the shared operating account. You order green curry when you're stressed. A short, quiet laugh escaped her. It was genuine, unexpected enough that I almost looked behind me to see what had caused it. Thank you, she said, the exhaustion in her voice softening into something warmer. Go, I said, gesturing down the stairs, then corrected myself. Will you go eat before you review another invoice? She turned, but stopped on the next step down. Are you coming? I looked at the exposed wall. I need to finish checking the access dimensions before the steel arrives at dawn. Corbin, she waited until I looked back at her. The steel isn't going to evaporate. Come eat. I wanted to stay in the tactical zone, where things made sense, where measurements didn't require emotional memory. But she remained on the step, leaving room for me without asking twice. 5 minutes, I said, following her down. The next morning, the structural reality shifted. The delivery truck arrived, blocking the street. I was outside, in my work boots and a heavy jacket, coordinating the offload of the fire doors, when a courier stepped onto the curb and handed me a thick manila envelope. I signed for it, stripped off my work gloves, and tore the flap open. It was a formal authority notice from the city. The HOA had petitioned for emergency administrative relief, citing the ongoing construction as a secondary hazard. They hadn't just filed for penalties. They wanted the third-floor occupancy suspended immediately while the petition was reviewed. The hearing was set for the end of the week. I read the clause twice, my jaw tightening. It was a tactical squeeze. Eleanor knew we were fixing the problem, so she was attacking the process of the fix itself. Macie came out of the coffee shop next door, holding 2 cups. She saw my face and slowed her pace. What is it? She asked, handing me a cup. I handed her the paper. She read it, and I watched the color drain from her face. They're moving the deadline. They want Arthur out by Friday. Her voice was hollow, stripped of the fight she usually carried. She looked at the heavy steel frames being unloaded, then at the notice. We can't finish the permanent suppression system by Friday. The plumbing inspector isn't even scheduled until next Tuesday. If the third floor loses occupancy, I said, the emergency placement coordinator can require temporary respite housing until the city signs off. Macie stepped back against the brick facade. He woke up in a hotel once after a pipe burst and didn't know my name for 2 days. If they move him into assisted housing, even temporarily. The rest of the sentence vanished. Her hand closed around my sleeve. I kept both hands visible. Can I steady you? She nodded once. I placed my palm against her shoulder, firm enough to give her a fixed point and no more. Look at me, I said. She took a shaky breath and met my eyes. My containment plan could support an emergency administrative stay, but a licensed fire protection engineer has to sign the technical assessment. I can build the evidence package. The city still has to approve it. I waited until the words stopped sounding like noise to her. Do you want me to take point on the containment plan, or do you want to? Macie's fingers loosened on my sleeve. Take point. I'll get the original plans and handle Arthur. All right. I let my hand drop. We need proof that the temporary measures control the actual hazard, proof that the remaining work is scheduled, and proof that Arthur has a protected route. Lena can verify the systems. A preservation architect has to verify the masonry and existing assemblies. The original blueprints are at my parents' old house, Macie said, standing taller, reclaiming her focus. In the basement archives, my dad kept everything. Then we ask Lena what details she needs, and we go get them. Before I made another call, I shifted Lena's site inspection to 10:30. After Macie's morning routine with Arthur and booked preservation architect Samuel Reed for noon, I sent both of them the city notice, the current photos, and the list of questions instead of telling Macie I had arranged my day around hers. The drive to the suburbs took an hour. The childhood home visit was a sharp departure from our tactical environment. The house was empty, currently listed for sale, smelling of dust and old wood. Macie unlocked the front door and moved through the foyer with the ghosts of her past. I followed her down into the basement. It was a sprawling space filled with filing cabinets and drafting tables. Rain ticked against the narrow ground-level windows. A black umbrella leaned in the corner beside a stack of flattened moving boxes, its curved handle almost identical to the one drying back at the studio. As Macie dug through a flat file drawer, searching for the specific structural roles, I watched her. She was fiercely competent, fiercely loyal to her uncle, and she had married a man who couldn't even remember the promises he made her. The guilt of that void pressed heavy on my chest. I wanted to tell her that even without the memories, the instinct to protect her was the loudest thing in my head. I wanted to confess that the arrangement felt less like a contract every day and more like a permanent reality. But I held it back. The timing would harm her. She needed a security consultant right now, not a fractured husband complicating the mission. Loyalty meant providing safety, not emotional pressure. "Found it," she said, pulling a heavy yellowed roll of vellum from the back of the drawer. She unrolled it across a dusty table, weighing the corners down with old brass compasses. I photographed the title block and called Samuel on video. He directed Macie to the masonry schedule while I checked the revision dates against the city archive. The drawings suggested a double-coursed brick separation wall, but Samuel was careful. "This is a clue, not a rating," he said through the phone. "I need to inspect the exposed wall, mortar condition, penetrations, and continuity to the roof deck. Lena decides what it means for the fire strategy after that." Macie traced one faded line without touching the brittle ink. "At least it tells us where to look." "It tells us where not to waste time," I said. She exhaled a long, shuddering breath. Then she looked toward the umbrella in the corner. "My father used to keep one in every room because he never remembered where he left them," she said. "After we signed the marriage papers, I thought maybe we would eventually become something more than—" She stopped. I did not fill the silence for her. Macie lifted the umbrella from the corner and held it out to me, dust on the black fabric. "She offered me her umbrella in the rain," she said, repeating the beginning of a memory I did have. "I took the wooden handle. Then we're sharing." Her hazel eyes held mine. A small smile found its way through the strain. "For good?" The question settled between the brass compasses and the yellowed plans. I could have answered because I wanted to. I did not answer because she deserved a choice made outside an emergency. I rolled the vellum carefully. "Let's get Arthur home through Friday first." Her smile faded only a little. She nodded, and the unanswered question came back to the city with us. Samuel met us at the building before noon. He inspected the exposed brick, checked the penetrations, and traced the wall to the roof deck while Lena recorded the findings. Macie matched each result to the permit packet. I maintained the evidence log and time-stamped the photographs. The wall was continuous. 2 utility penetrations needed fire stopping, but the original assembly was intact enough for Lena to design a temporary strategy. It did not end the problem. It made approval possible. Lena drafted the technical assessment. Samuel signed his field report. Macie assembled the permits, contractor licenses, resident plan, and Monday installation schedule. I added the access map, daily checklist, emergency contacts, photographic index, and vendor confirmations. The city portal rejected our first upload because one drawing was too large. Macie compressed the exhibits. I split the evidence index, and Samuel delivered the signed original. At 7:12, the status changed from incomplete to received. The examiner sent 3 questions. Our packet already contained all 3 answers. Friday morning arrived, the deadline. The city inspector arrived at 8 with Eleanor and a city attorney carrying the petition file. Lena and Samuel stood near the barrier. Macie stood beside me in the stairwell, her hands clasped tightly. "The petition states the area is unsafe for habitation during construction," Eleanor said to the inspector, pointing at the exposed steel. The inspector looked at his tablet, then at the newly installed fire doors, labeled temporary suppression units, protected route markings, and the daily inspection sheet mounted inside a clear sleeve. He checked Lena's license, Samuel's report, and the contractor tags before looking at me. "Who assembled the occupant safety plan?" he asked. "Macie did," I said. "She coordinated Arthur's protected route, studio occupancy limits, medication schedule, and the permit records. My firm organized the containment logistics and evidence package. Ms. Ortiz and Mr. Reed certified the technical findings." Macie glanced at me, but I kept my attention on the inspector. He tested the third-floor door, inspected the temporary alarm linkage, and asked Lena 2 questions about the suppression coverage. Then, he tapped his tablet and turned it so the city attorney could read the screen. "I am issuing a written conditional occupancy order," he said. "The third floor may remain occupied under this containment plan. Daily checks are mandatory. The 2 wall penetrations must be fire-stopped today, and the permanent suppression installation must proceed Monday. Any missed condition voids the order." The city attorney closed the petition folder. With a conditional occupancy order in effect, the city will withdraw the request for emergency suspension. Eleanor's face flushed a deep mottled red. "That is unacceptable. The board." "The board," Macie stepped forward, her voice ringing clear and authoritative in the stairwell, "has no jurisdiction to replace a city order or licensed technical assessment. You tried to use a real safety issue to force my uncle out before we could cure it. You failed. If the HOA levies another bad faith fine or approaches my family outside formal notice, we will challenge it and seek our legal costs." The inspector nodded once. "The permit remains active. The written order will be in the portal within the hour." He turned and headed down the stairs with the city attorney. Eleanor looked at the documents clipped to the wall, the stamped contractor tags, and the closed fire doors. She had lost the argument because we had removed the reason for it. Without a word, she turned and followed them. The heavy silence returned, but this time, it wasn't oppressive. It was the sound of safety. Macie turned to me. The tension that had held her rigid seemed to release one joint at a time. She let out a sudden, breathless laugh. It echoed in the stairwell, bright and entirely unexpected. I found myself smiling, the rigid discipline in my jaw relaxing. "It's not over," I said, looking at the Monday schedule. "But Arthur stays home." "Arthur stays home," she agreed. 6 weeks later, the rain was back. The permanent suppression work was complete, the correction order was closed, and the studio's classes had returned to every room. Theo's watercolor of the building beneath an oversized umbrella hung behind the front desk. Uncle Arthur was secure upstairs, napping to the jazz station. Eleanor had resigned, the HOA had withdrawn the fines, and the settlement rested beneath Macie's permit folder. I walked out of the heavy glass doors of the building and stepped under the awning of the local coffee shop next door. Macie was waiting for me. She wore a heavy wool coat today, her hands wrapped around 2 steaming paper cups. She handed one to me. I didn't have to check. I knew it was black, with a pinch of salt. "Thank you," I said. She looked through the coffee shop window. The afternoon clay class was setting bowls on a drying rack. "The final inspection report is framed in my office." "That seems aggressive." I used a tasteful frame. The laugh surprised both of us again, smaller this time and easier. She turned to face me, the steam curling between us. The frantic urgency of the past weeks had settled into a steady, quiet rhythm. We still shared the apartment. We still shared the responsibilities. But the space between us had changed. It wasn't just a contract anymore. "This morning I met with Daniel from Legal Aid," she said. "We amended the marriage agreement." My hand tightened around the cup. Without me? I signed my part. She reached into her coat pocket and held out a folded copy. "The asset protections stay. The exit clause stays because either of us should always be free to choose. The fixed end date is gone." I opened the paper. Her signature waited above a blank line for mine. "When you stepped in front of Eleanor that day," Macie said quietly, nodding toward the spot on the sidewalk where the thermos had spilled, "you didn't remember why we were married. But when I told you not to command me, you stepped back. When I told you to take point, you did. You kept making room for my answer." "My memory is still fragmented," I admitted. my voice low, dropping the tactical mask entirely. I don't remember the day I met you. I don't remember signing the first agreement. But I know who you are. She looked down at her coffee cup, a small smile playing on her lips. She reached into her other coat pocket and pulled out the collapsed black umbrella. She held it out to me. I took the wooden handle, my fingers brushing against hers. The rain carried the faint bitter trace of coffee from the cafe's open door, cleaner now than the smell from the overturned thermos. Macie stepped closer beneath the awning. You left a question unanswered in my parents' basement. I signed the amended agreement against the cafe window, capped the pen, and returned the paper to her. Then I hit the umbrella button. The black canopy snapped open, shielding us both from the gray world outside. You don't win an argument, I said, angling the umbrella so neither of us had to yield the dry space. You remove the reason for it. Her hazel eyes locked onto mine, clear and certain. And my question? I rested my hand gently against the small of her back and waited until she moved with me into the rain. For good, I said. The end. Closing thoughts. Core lesson. Reliable love protects freedom, shares responsibility, and keeps showing up after the immediate crisis has passed. Green flag. Healthy love respects agency and proves itself through consistent, dependable action. Toxic passion demands control, urgency, or surrender. What practical action makes you feel safest and most valued in a relationship? Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this. The end.